Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. That dapper looking gentleman there is Greg Cosell. I am your humble host, Buck Reising. Humble is probably a stretch, but either way, we're happy to have you in for another episode of the pod. Greg, this local professional football team has played one divisional game in 12 weeks and has five left to go, starting with this road trip to the Houston Texans. And Titans fans, I think at this point are just looking at things that they can continue to build on, not just in 2024, but beyond that. And I guess the place to start would probably be quarterback, since he's now two games back into the lineup and,
Right.
showing some increased, at least level of poise in the way that he operates, as we kind of talked about last week. But obviously, we're looking for more. So I wonder what your assessment of Will was in this game against the defense that we talked about was going to be very, very challenging.
Well, I'm just looking for 98-yard touchdowns every week, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very few and far between the moments that anybody has had to stand up out of their seat when watching a Titans game, Greg. So I'll take it.
Right, right. You know, I think that clearly Levis the last couple of weeks has shown just a little more poise, general composure in the way in which he's played. Um, he's still a young quarterback who needs a lot of experience in certain parts. You always hear things like manage the game, okay? And that's a term that in many ways people view that as a negative pejorative term. But I've had the opportunity, just because he does games now, to hear Tom Brady talk a lot more.
Yeah.
And obviously you're dealing with a super smart guy at the quarterback position, and he's so good in terms of talking about what that means. Because people think of that means, oh, well, that means you can't put the game in the hands of the quarterback. It means he's got to hand off. I mean, that's not what managing a game means. And I want to give you one example. And this is not a knock on Levis. It's just part of the learning process. So I want to give you an example that I think is in some ways really a good one. There was a play late in the first quarter of this past game, okay, against the Vikings. It was 2nd and 12. The play ended up just being a play where Levis kind of left the pocket and threw a deep ball that was incomplete. I don't know whether you remember the play or you don't remember the play. It was late in the first quarter. It's not a memorable play. People probably thought, oh, he's throwing it into double and triple coverage and it's incomplete because he threw it down the field to Ridley. Okay. But the
Yeah, I
reason I
know
mentioned
exactly the play that you're talking about, by the
Okay.
way.
The reason I mention this play, and I think this is important so people anecdotally can get a sense of, when I talk a little more philosophically and abstractly, because obviously from watching tape, I know exactly what I mean. People who, are accountants or who work in the music business on Music Row, they're not living in my world. So they're not seeing it the way I am, you know. So it was a play where the Vikings were in what we call a double mug front, where they have two players on each side of the center, something that the Vikings do a lot in long yardage and on third down. Okay. And there's really only two ways to pass protect against that. The most common way is the center is responsible for one of those players in the A gap, and the back is responsible for the other player in the A gap. That's the way 99.9% of teams protect against that. Okay? So your back needs to be in position to be able to step up and block. Well, on that particular play, the Titans were in the pistol formation, which means the back is behind the quarterback. There's no way that the back can possibly be in position to block one of those double A gap players. It's incumbent upon Levis, and this is what made me think of it because I've been hearing Brady every week, and it made me just think, watching the play of, Will, you have to move the back. That's your responsibility. You have to make it a shotgun formation, not a pistol formation, so the back can be in position to step up and block. Because whoever it was, I think it might have been Cashman, you know, ended up rushing, and Spears, I believe it was, tried to do it but he's behind the quarterback.
Yeah.
He can't do it. So he ended up not really being able to do it. Levis had to kind of rush up and just make, a hurried random throw, and just that's what managing a game is about, on those kinds of things. And ideally that comes with experience, but that's also not a super difficult thing. So you'd like to think that you'd be able to do that now. So again, I don't want this to come across as, boy, Levis is stupid. He doesn't know how to play. He's got a lot of things going on in his head right now. He hasn't won a start this year. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I'm not looking to defend him, but that's something you've got to be able to do.
Yeah, and to your point, Greg, like it's just that it's continue. And I know, he's missed some time, and there's no way for him to grow and develop if he's not on the field, which we also talk about last week as being something that he can have some level of control over, right? The way that he protects himself to make sure that he's available to gain as much value out of these reps as humanly possible. But I think that's kind of the crux of the frustration around him is why is it still taking this long? When there has to be some level of understanding, because I think Brady, to your point about Brady articulating a lot of this stuff for people, and based on what I've heard Tom talk about on the broadcast, he is very much for sitting these guys right out of the gate as young players. And I thought he did a really good job, in particular, talking about Caleb Williams here in the last couple of weeks,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
he had some discussions with Caleb Williams and also had talked to the Bears in the lead up to that. And when he saw Caleb Williams during the game doing some of the stuff that Brady had talked to him about, you could really tell how much more not how much more engaged Brady got with it, but how much more clearly he was able to articulate that to the audience because there was the picture based on what Tom Brady
Yeah, and
seeing
and
in his
and
head.
and being a great quarterback, and obviously we're not talking about Caleb Williams or Will Levis being great quarterbacks. That's not my point. But the point is reaching a high level is about doing the right thing on every play. Now you can do the right thing and the defense can still win because this is the NFL, but it's doing the right thing on every play. I actually heard him talk about Josh Allen, and he was talking about Josh Allen. Through the years and saying, Josh Allen is obviously capable in any moment of doing something absolutely ridiculously special. But then 4 plays later, he could do something that's just not good. He said one reason this year his game has really improved is because he's not doing that thing 4 plays later that's not good. And that may not show up because it doing something good doesn't mean the play's positive and that it's a 20-yard gain. Okay, that's my point. Is that it's just doing those little things like moving the back. Okay, maybe that play still would have been an incompletion, but that would have been an example because I sit here and watch, as you know, I've watched tape 7 days a week and as many games as I can every single week. I don't count the hours, but I'm watching a lot of tape, so I see everybody, and it's little things like that that stand out to me. So when I saw that Levis play on 2nd and 12 late in the first quarter, that stood out to me immediately. You got to move the back. You can't block it that way, and that's on him. That's not on
Yeah.
the back. That's on him.
Right. And I
So,
and I think that's a great point in the sense that, what we're talking about on a regular basis. Not just the traits and the things that we talk about as being the raw talent, but the developed skill over time, which also includes, are you putting yourself in the best possible position to
right.
succeed on these plays? And then there is also, Greg, we've talked about, he is somebody, or at least at this stage of his career, who would benefit from a lot of these throws, a lot of these reads being very easily defined. And I
Correct.
wonder what you make of just generally the offense as a whole right now,
Yeah.
beyond just him as the focal point.
I mean, look, I see a lot of quarterbacks, I see a lot of coaches, I've seen a lot through the years, and obviously there's certain things. Everybody has their own personal worldview of what they think is, who's in the business, of the kinds of things they like and don't like. So when I watch coaches with quarterbacks, and I'm a big believer in coaching just based on my background, guys who taught me, because obviously, I did not play football in high school or college because of where I grew up. So I had to learn football, and I was fortunate being taught by incredibly smart people. And, I keep doing that. I keep talking to coaches as much as I can. So I have a sense in my mind of what I, think really helps quarterbacks. And every coach wants the primary receiver in a route concept to be the one who gets the ball. Now, is that going to happen all the time? Of course not. But what you're trying to do for a quarterback is you're trying to present a route concept or concepts where it's clean. So when he drops back and he looks to number one, he can deliver the football. That's what you're trying to do. So, we've mentioned Caleb Williams. One of the things that the new coordinator did last week, I actually think Shane Waldron did some of this as well, but Williams didn't execute it as well as he did last week. And don't forget, this was a humbling experience for Caleb Williams as well, because when your OC gets fired, he gets fired because you're not performing. That's why he got fired. So it's humbling for Caleb Williams. But there were so many just quick one read, no read throws. Okay. So now you give a quarterback completions and he starts to feel like he's into the game. And when I watch the Titans, sometimes I feel like those kinds of completions are not there. And the thing about Levis is he's not a pure timing anticipation guy. He's always probably going to be just a beat late. And there are quarterbacks in the league who are, and you can play. It's not like you can't play, but you have to understand that and just give him the kinds of routes and concepts where, hey, he can see it and he can throw it. That he's not sort of, is that a little murky? Do I have to make a tight window throw? Do I have to throw it off a guy that I'm not sure where he's going to be? You start getting into that and you're just playing into the fact that he's going to be a beat late. And again, this is no knock on Callahan. They're working through it too. They're trying to figure out, because don't forget, Levis has missed a lot of time. And I'm telling you right now, you talk to coaches and they'll tell you it takes 3 years really to work with a quarterback every day. Now, fans don't want to hear that, and we all get that, but that's sort of the reality of life.
Yeah, and to your point, there's just as there's a growth curve for young quarterbacks, there's also a growth curve for a new coaching staff. A lot of people doing these respective jobs for
Who,
the
by
first
the way, is
trying
used
to
to
feel
Joe
it out.
Burrow, who's as high level as it gets when it comes to the timing and anticipation element.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about here a lot locally, like how much of an adjustment that is calling plays for Joe Burrow versus Will Levis, who is clearly a different player.
He's a
And a
different
lot
player.
there's
Right.
not a lot of Joe Burrows running around out there, Greg.
No, in fact, there's very few.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So, that also adds to, okay, how do we kind of take the offense that I'm familiar with, because that's where I've been for the last, what, 4 or 5 years, whatever he was in Cincinnati.
Like five.
Yeah. And he's been with Burrow the entire time, and Burrow's a special guy in that regard. And now you have Levis, whose game's not like that. And again, it doesn't mean Levis can't play, but his game's not like that.
Yeah. I believe he had Burrow every year, but the first year that Zach Taylor and them got hired. I think they drafted Burrow in 2020 and they were hired as a staff in 2019, if memory serves
Okay, so he's been with Burrow the
correct.
entire time.
But the entire time, yeah.
Right.
For
Right.
Joe's entire career, yes, he
Yeah.
had Burrow the entire time up until this season. Before we move on to the Texans, because obviously that's a tough test, especially going on the road against the D'Amico Ryans defense. Greg, I wondered if you had any thoughts about some of these young, because we're also
Yeah.
talking about other players on the roster that this team can continue to build upon. I thought Latham has had a couple of good weeks now against two really tough defenses. I thought he
Yeah.
acquitted himself very well against the Chargers in particular. And then I thought this was one of the best interior games from both Sweat and Simmons as a combination
Yeah.
that we've seen, the way that they were consistently able to impact things. And also Jarvis Brownlee, who's playing a lot of snaps right now, and we understand is a fifth round rookie, so there's a little bit of a
He's playing
different.
almost every snap because he's the boundary corner. I mean, that's a big deal in the NFL to play boundary corner.
He's
So
played
he's
damn near 500 defensive snaps so far this season because both Snead and Awuzie have missed time. So just generally, if you had any thoughts on the three of those players at this point.
oh yeah. I mean, I, I thought Sweat after having a couple of games where not where he was bad, but where he didn't necessarily flash.
Yeah.
This week he flashed. Sweat I thought played really well. Sweat and Simmons is a really good tandem. I mean, you have to assume they'll be together for a number of years. That's a really good starting point. Because we lose sight of one thing in this league, and I've talked about this with the Detroit Lions. Sometimes we get caught up, and not caught up because it's not wrong, in the fact that who are the key players on defenses? They're the edge pass rusher and corners, and they are. Like I said, I'm not saying they're not, but one of the reasons I think that a team like the Lions is so good, and unfortunately they just lost Alex Anzalone probably for the rest of the regular season, um, is they're so good down the middle of their defense. And I think that gets lost sometimes. They're two D tackles, Anzalone and Jack Campbell. They may have the best safety duo in the league in Branch and Kirby Joseph. And sometimes being really strong down the middle gets lost because of the focus on edge pass rushers and corners. And there's nothing wrong with being really strong down the middle in the NFL. And I think Simmons and Sweat give them that. I think Brownlee's played well. By the way, I think Baker's played pretty good too. Um,
Yeah, agreed. I thought that they've both, given the circumstances, Greg, and you're expected to perform when you're out there on the field in the NFL, no matter who you are, what your pedigree is. But I think those two have really tried to hold their own. And it is, I know that there are flaws and there's different ways to nitpick them, but they are one of the stingiest, if not the stingiest, pass defense in football right now.
Oh, they're really good. And McCreary's a really good slot corner. So, this is a good defense. Defense is not the issue, obviously. And I agree about Latham. The thing that's just bringing them down, and it has, no matter what Brian Callahan thinks of Will Levis and the future there, that's a conversation we'll be having later, obviously. They'll be having it too, you know. Um, the right side of the O-line is just so problematic that sometimes it's just hard to get anything done.
Can't wait to watch Nick Petit-Frere start again this week.
Yeah, but the point is the fact that they basically rotated with a 2019 player, probably knows him well. They're both from Ohio State, Isaiah Prince, who,
Yeah.
believe it or not, I did coming out of Ohio State in 2019. The fact that they each played about an equal number of snaps tells you really all you need to know.
And arguably, I mean, I know Prince had the three illegal procedure penalties, one of which negated the 51-yard touchdown, would have been 51-yard touchdown to Ridley, but Prince may have been the best one that we've seen so far out of all the, I think, five guys who
And
have
it's
played.
still he still had too many bad snaps, I can tell you that.
Agreed.
So
So
yeah, I mean
certainly not.
that's yeah, they got to address that. I mean, no matter what they do, and by the way, that's another difference between Joe Burrow and Will Levis, and it's no knock on Levis, but Burrow can compensate and camouflage for bad O-line play. Will Levis cannot.
Yeah.
Certainly not at this point, and he may not be that guy anyway. But that's that's what Callahan's used to. That Joe Burrow can compensate for it.
No, for sure. I mean, it is, in the same way that we talked about the left side for the last couple of years undermining what they're trying to get accomplished. That's now flipped to the right side in the way that they have struggled, and also Dylan Radin's coming off of injury after he seemed to have at least leveled out a little bit at his
Right.
position. That has not been an ideal couple of games for him back to back coming off that foot injury at this point. So nothing like a Houston Texans defense to test that. And Will Anderson, we don't know whether he'll be back in the lineup officially, though he did return in a limited capacity to practice yesterday. I did see. Greg, this is a front that has so many different options, so many
Yeah.
different ways that they can attack you. D'Amico Ryans obviously has the mind for it, running that defense as well. The problems that they present to an offensive line, to any offensive line, not just a struggling one, what kind of defines the
Well,
way that they're playing right
I
now?
think one of the things that always stood out to me about D'Amico Ryans, given that he has a 49ers pedigree, is he's not necessarily exotic. Like when you play his defense, it's not like, oh my God, they're going to blitz from all over. Oh my God, they're going to do this. But he's so good situationally and selectively with what he does. Like my sense watching him is when you get to the quote unquote critical high leverage type of downs, 3rd and 8, red zone, the times in games where you feel like, hey, this is an important play in the game. We all feel that when we watch a game. This feels like an important play. It could be in the first quarter, it could be in the third quarter, but we all have that sense, right, Buck, where we feel like this is an important play. I feel like that's where D'Amico Ryan's, that's where he's at his best. That's where he does something beyond just, hey, let's line up and play. That's where he has a pressure. That's where he just does something a little different. Not that you've never seen it before, but because don't forget, it's not that guys have never seen anything. It's just that it looks different. And for a quarterback, if it's a pass play on the offense, the quarterback just has to take that extra beat to kind of decipher it. And in the NFL, that extra beat is like an hour for you and I.
No question. It is, and certainly Danico Autry is somebody who continues
Oh
to
yeah, he's a really
play.
good player. He's
I was
always
talking to
been.
Jeff about him yesterday, Greg, and just that little stutter rush move that
Yeah.
he uses to kind of get offensive tackles and offensive linemen off balance. He's still able to deploy that at a high level. He's just working really well in concert with the other pieces that they have.
And I'll tell you a guy that I was a little bit wrong on, and I think he's played really well this season. I mean, I thought he was a really nice college player. I was uncertain as to what he could be in the NFL, but To'o Toho has turned out to be a really nice player for them. He starts now, Christian Harris, I guess he might be out for the year because he hasn't played at all.
Yep.
And they've played Hewitt, who's kind of been around the league. But that's also a tribute to D'Amico Ryans and the staff. But To'o has been a really nice player. And obviously, we all know him in the SEC, played 40 years, two at Tennessee, two at Alabama. Really good player in college. I just didn't think he could be a true NFL starter and be really good. He's proven me wrong. His tape's really good. I think he's a really smart, savvy, aware player.
No, I mean, the league was certainly in line with your thinking, Greg. If I'm not mistaken, he was a fifth round pick.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
definitely there were definitely some questions about him coming out.
yeah.
Not a lot of love for him in Tennessee after transferring at Alabama, but he went on to have success, and you can't fault the guy.
Speaking of Tennessee, how about Dalton Connect the other night?
Buddy, it's making everybody on my show, Greg, want to be a Lakers fan, and I'm trying to hold the fort down for the Memphis Grizzlies here because I
Nine for
don't have any
12.
reason for
Yeah.
people to care about
He was
basketball here.
9 for 12 from three-point range, 30. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
I don't know if you saw LeBron's comments about him, but he's like, yeah, we just didn't. He used a little more colorful language than I did, but he said, yeah, we just didn't screw that up. Everybody else screwed that one up.
Right, right, right,
We
right,
didn't
right,
screw it up when it came to us, which I thought
right,
was
right.
pretty apt for the SEC Player of the Year. But that's neither here nor there. So this is a versatile
I
podcast.
know, I know. Well,
Basketball,
I
a little
was, yeah,
football from time to
yeah.
time. Perhaps we'll be talking about the Indiana Hoosiers in the college football playoff as we get a little further down the stretch here, Greg. Quickly though, because I don't want to take too much of your time today. Joe Mixon coming off a phenomenal
Yeah.
performance. That offensive line also looked about as capable as it has
Well,
as a unit here in the last
let's
couple of weeks, or at least that's what it looked like to me.
let's quickly address that. One of the reasons that Mixon has been getting a ton of volume is quite frankly, the O-line this year has not pass protected as they did a year ago. And you can see it when you watch the tape that CJ Stroud's not as comfortable a player this year. He's playing a little faster because that look, we've seen that he moves better than many thought when he came out of college, but he's a pocket quarterback at his core.
Right.
He's not a run around quarterback. He's a pocket quarterback. And he's played a little faster this year because whether he's anticipating pressure, perceiving pressure, that's in his head. I can't speak to that, but the tape tells you that he's just playing faster. So it hasn't been the same for him. So given the O line and given that their defense is pretty good, they've clearly made a decision as a staff that let's have a higher volume run game. And the O line has run blocked far better than they've pass protected. And Mixon is a physical, tough, grinding back. He's had some long runs, which is not necessarily his forte, but he's had some long ones. But therefore, he's getting, I guess he missed a couple of games, but I would bet he's averaging close to 20, if not 20 carries a game in the games that he's played.
Oh yeah, no, it's
If not
definitely
more
high
than
volume.
20. If not
And,
more than 20.
and he was obviously maybe not to that extent, Greg, but he was obviously a big part of what they did in Cincinnati. So that's kind of what he's accustomed to, but they've really,
Oh,
really leaned on him this year.
no, and they've had to because like I said, the pass pro. And don't forget they missed Collins for 5 weeks.
Mhm.
He's a big time receiver. Diggs is out for the year. So they've had to make every team has to make adjustments during a season, and they've been able to do that. And the quicker you make them, then usually the better off you are.
Of course, you can get ready for Week 12 in the NFL with the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN. You can catch it on Saturday mornings. You can set your DVR the way that I do. You can get it on demand on ESPN Plus. A lot of bigger games in the NFC this weekend, Greg, but that Monday nighter between the Ravens and the Chiefs is
Yeah,
fascinating to me.
yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the NFC because I think that the Lions Colts, which is an interconference game, obviously, is a really intriguing one as well. Because Anthony Richardson had his best game as a pro last week, and the Lions, offensively, they're a fun watch. They're a great example of what I'm talking about with their route concepts and their spacing and how they help define the throws. And Goff is just a great window thrower, and there's not a lot of guys who can throw in tight windows between the numbers as well as Jared Goff. And that's a trait. That's a hard trait. But yeah, the Ravens Chargers, Chargers are, they're a Harbaugh team. They're solid in every way. You don't come away watching them going, man, that was just awesome. But they're just really solid. Herbert's not throwing a pick in 8 games. He's only got one for the season. They run the ball. They're multiple formationally. There's a lot of motion. I mean, there's a lot going on that's not necessarily exciting, but it's really productive.
No, they're grinding teams down, as we know that Jim Harbaugh definitely likes to do, and this roster is exactly built to do just that. Greg, appreciate your time as always, brother. A great podcast. Good to chat, and we'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.